She was the most beautiful woman in the world. She won 2 Oscars. She married 8 times, but for 17 years, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't free. She was property owned by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios under a contract that controlled every aspect of her life. This is the story of Hollywood's golden cage and the girl who fought her way out. Chapter 1. The child they turned into Pyro Piatti. Elizabeth Rosamond Taylor was born in London in 1932 to American parents. By age 7, her family had moved to Los Angeles, and a studio scout had spotted her violet eyes. By age 10, she'd signed her first contract with Universal Pictures. By 12, she was a star in National Velvet, and by 17, she was trapped. MGM Studios signed Elizabeth to a contract in 1943 when she was just 11 years old. Her parents were thrilled their daughter would be a movie star. What they didn't understand was what they'd actually signed. Not a job, not an opportunity, an ownership agreement. The contract gave MGM complete control over Elizabeth's life until she turned 20. They decided which movies she made, which events she attended, who she dated, what she wore, where she lived, when she slept. The studio owned her image, her time, and effectively, her body. She couldn't refuse a role without being suspended without pay. She couldn't gain weight. Weekly wines were mandatory. She couldn't cut her hair. She couldn't marry without studio approval. She couldn't even go to a restaurant without a studio-approved chaperone. For 17 years, Elizabeth Taylor was the most famous teenager in America, and she had less freedom than most prisoners. The only difference was that her cage was gilded, and millions of people envied her for being locked inside it. Chapter 2. The Factory. SYSTE. Understand Elizabeth's contract. You have to understand how Hollywood worked in the 1940s and 50s. Studios didn't just make movies, they manufactured stars like products on an assembly line. MGM was the most powerful studio in Hollywood. Their motto was more stars than there are in heaven. They owned hundreds of actors under 7-year contracts that could be extended indefinitely if the actor was valuable enough. Elizabeth was incredibly valuable. National Velvet made her a household name at 12 years old, so MGM extended her contract, then extended it again. By the time she was 20, she'd been under contract for 9 years with no end in sight. The studio controlled everything. They had a moral clause that allowed them to terminate the contract if an actor behaved immorally, but only they decided what that meant. Men could have affairs, drink heavily, gamble. Women had to be perfect, or at least appear perfect. Elizabeth was assigned a studio-approved drama coach, voice coach, dance instructor, and etiquette teacher. She was put on a strict diet and exercise regimen. They capped her teeth, plucked her eyebrows, and taught her how to walk, talk, and smile on command. One former MGM executive later admitted, "We didn't develop talent. We manufactured products. Elizabeth Taylor was our most expensive, most beautiful product, and we protected our investment." Chapter 3. The Marriages. They CEO enter or lead. At 17, Elizabeth fell in love for the first time. His name was William Pauly Jr., son of a wealthy businessman. Young, handsome, from a good family. Elizabeth wanted to marry him. MGM said no. Why? Because married teenage stars weren't marketable. The studio had spent years building Elizabeth's image as America's sweetheart, innocent, available, the girl every boy dreamed of dating. A husband would ruin that fantasy. They broke up the relationship by sending Elizabeth on a publicity tour. By the time she returned, Pauly had moved on. Elizabeth was devastated. Her mother, who depended on Elizabeth's income, told her to stop being dramatic. The studio said it was for the best. At 17, Elizabeth learned an important lesson. Her feelings didn't matter. Then came Nikki Hilton, heir to the Hilton Hotel fortune. Now the studio was interested. A Hilton marriage would be prestigious, wealthy, and great publicity. They orchestrated the entire courtship like a PR campaign. Elizabeth married Nikki Hilton in 1950. She was 18. The wedding was a media circus, sponsored by MGM. The studio controlled everything: the dress, the guest list, the honeymoon location. It was the perfect Hollywood wedding. The marriage was a disaster. Hilton was an alcoholic and a gambler who became physically abusive. Elizabeth wanted to leave immediately. MGM told her to wait. Divorce would be bad for her image. She endured 8 months of hell before finally filing for divorce in 1951. Chapter 4. The roles they forced on HR. Elizabeth didn't just want to be beautiful, she wanted to be taken seriously as an actress. But MGM had other plans. They put her in lightweight romantic comedies, costume dramas, anything that would showcase her beauty and make money. Father of the Bride, Quo Vadis, Ivanhoe, light, pretty, forgettable. Elizabeth begged for challenging roles. The studio said no. They didn't need her to be a great actress. They needed her to be beautiful and profitable. In 1951, Elizabeth was cast in A Place in the Sun with Montgomery Clift. Finally, a serious role, a real character. She gave the performance of her young life. Critics praised her. She should have gotten an Oscar nomination. MGM barely promoted the film. It wasn't their production, so they didn't care. Instead, they immediately cast her in more fluffy roles. Love is Better Than Ever, The Girl Who Had Everything. Titles that could have been describing Elizabeth's gilded cage. She had everything except freedom. By the mid-1950s, Elizabeth was the highest paid actress in Hollywood, earning $5,000 per week. But MGM took a cut of everything. Endorsements, public appearances, even her wedding gifts. The studio calculated that they'd earned over $50 million from Elizabeth Taylor by the time she was 20. She'd seen a fraction of it. Chapter 5. The Rebellion, B.G.I. Nesson, 1952. Elizabeth married Michael Wilding, a British actor 20 years her senior. MGM approved this marriage. Wilding was respectable, successful, Elizabeth wanted stability. What she got was boredom. But something changed during this marriage. Elizabeth started pushing back against the studio. Small rebellions at first, showing up late to set, questioning script changes, demanding better roles. MGM responded with threats. They could suspend her without pay. They could refuse to cast her in anything for years. They could destroy her reputation with the press. And in the 1950s, the studios controlled most entertainment journalism. But Elizabeth had something they didn't expect: leverage. By 1956, she was the biggest female star in Hollywood. Audiences would watch anything she was in. Magazine covers featuring her face sold out. She was too valuable to actually punish, so she kept pushing. She demanded script approval. She refused roles she considered beneath her. And in 1956, she got cast in Giant alongside James Dean and Rock Hudson. Finally, a role worthy of her talent. Giant proved Elizabeth could actually act. She wasn't just a pretty face. She was powerful, emotional, complex. The studio couldn't deny it anymore, but they also couldn't control her anymore. Chapter 6. The Scandal That Changed FAYGR. Giant. In 1957, Elizabeth's friend and producer Mike Todd became her third husband. Todd was brash, confident, and most importantly not intimidated by MGM. He told Elizabeth she was worth more than the studio was paying her. He encouraged her to fight back. Their marriage was passionate but brief. In 1958, Todd died in a plane crash. Elizabeth was devastated. Hollywood expected her to grieve privately, maintain her image, and get back to work. Instead, she fell into the arms of Eddie Fisher, who was married to Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart. The scandal was nuclear. Elizabeth Taylor, the girl next door, was a hook. The press destroyed her. MGM panicked. The moral clause in her contract could allow them to terminate her. But she was too profitable to lose. So they did something unexpected. They used the scandal. They cast her in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof and Butterfield 8 roles that played on her newfound reputation as a seductress. The public loved it. Elizabeth was no longer America's sweetheart. She was Hollywood's bad girl, and she was bigger than ever. The Eddie Fisher marriage happened in 1959. Elizabeth didn't care what the studio thought anymore. She was 27 years old and finally learning that her value gave her power. Chapter 7. Cleopatra and Ephoridio. In 1960. 20th Century Fox offered Elizabeth the role of Cleopatra. She demanded $1 million on unheard-of salary at the time. Fox agreed. MGM's contract was expiring, and Elizabeth was finally negotiating as a free agent. Cleopatra was a disaster of a production over budget, behind schedule, plagued with problems, but it gave Elizabeth something more valuable than money. It gave her Richard Burton. Burton was married. Elizabeth was married. They fell in love anyway, passionately, destructively, obsessively. The scandal made the Eddie Fisher affair look tame. The Vatican condemned them. Politicians called them immoral. The press followed their every move, and Elizabeth didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was choosing what she wanted without asking permission. MGM's contract had finally ended in 1959. She was free, and she was going to live however she wanted. She divorced Eddie Fisher. Burton divorced his wife. They married in 1964, the first of their 2 marriages to each other. It was messy, public, and completely on Elizabeth's terms. Chapter 8. The cost of the cast of the car. Freedom came with a price. Elizabeth had spent 17 years being controlled, and it had damaged her in ways she'd never fully recover from. She struggled with weight issues. Decades of studio-mandated diets had destroyed her relationship with food. She developed a dependence on pain medication after a series of injuries on film sets, where the studio had pushed her to work through pain. Rehook 8. She married 8 times, always searching for the stability and love she'd been denied as a controlled child star. Her relationships with her children were complicated. She'd been raised by a studio instead of parents, and didn't always know how to be a mother herself. But she also became Hollywood's first truly independent female star. After MGM, Elizabeth negotiated her own contracts. She demanded profit participation. She chose her own roles. When she won her first Oscar for Butterfield 8 in 1961, it felt like validation not just of her talent, but of her fight for freedom. Her second Oscar came in 1967 for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She was brilliant, raw, and unrecognizable from the beautiful teenager MGM had manufactured. She'd become an actress on her own terms. Chapter 9. The legacy of Sayo Entiro. By the 1970s, Elizabeth Taylor was no longer making movies regularly. She'd done something revolutionary. She'd walked away while she was still a star. She didn't need Hollywood's approval anymore. She focused on her relationships, her jewelry collection, and eventually, her AIDS activism. In the 1980s, when Hollywood was silent about the epidemic, Elizabeth used her fame to raise awareness and millions of dollars for research. Rehook 9. People asked why she cared so much. The answer was simple. She'd spent her life being controlled by people who valued her only as a product. She'd watched friends like Rock Hudson suffer and die while the industry that had profited from them stayed silent. She wasn't going to let that happen again. Elizabeth Taylor died in 2011 at 79 years old. By then, the studio system that had owned her was long dead. 7-year contracts were illegal. Child labor laws protected young actors. The world had changed, but Elizabeth had paid the price for that change. She'd been the test case, the girl who fought back and won, but who carried the scars of that fight forever. Chapter 10. What the contract really CIO, a SIA MGM contract that controlled Elizabeth Taylor's life from age 11 to 25, wasn't unique. Thousands of actors signed similar contracts. Most faded into obscurity or lived quietly with their trauma. Elizabeth was different because she fought back. She used her beauty as leverage. She used her talent as proof of her value. She used her scandals to show that the studio couldn't control her personal life forever. Rehook 10. But what did it cost her? 3 failed marriages before age 30. A lifetime struggle with addiction. Complicated relationships with her children. Decades of health problems stemming from the stress of her early career. She once said in an interview, "I don't regret my career. I regret that I wasn't allowed to have a childhood. I was never 11. I was never 15. I went from child to product to star without ever being a person." That was the real cost of the contract. Not the money MGM took, not the roles they forced her into, not even the relationships they controlled. The cost was her childhood, her identity, her sense of self. Elizabeth Taylor spent the rest of her life trying to figure out who she was outside of the image MGM had created. Some days she succeeded. Other days, she was still that 11-year-old girl signing a contract she didn't understand, giving away her freedom for the promise of stardom. Final cliffhanger. In 2011, shortly before Elizabeth Taylor died, her estate attorneys discovered something interesting while organizing her papers. Hidden among personal letters and legal documents was her original 1943 MGM contract, the one signed when she was 11 years old. Elizabeth had kept it all those years. But there was something unusual about it. Certain clauses had been highlighted in pen marked up in Elizabeth's own handwriting, with notes in the margins. Next to the morality clause, applies to women only. Next to the weight requirement, inhumane. Next to the clause about studio approval for all public appearances, prison. Rehook final. And at the bottom of the final page, in Elizabeth's distinctive script, she'd written a single sentence. "I signed this when I was a child. It took me 17 years to stop being their property." The estate attorneys also found something else, a letter Elizabeth had written in 1959, right after her MGM contract expired. It was addressed to young actors everywhere, but had never been sent, never published, never seen by anyone until after her death. In it, she wrote, "They will tell you that signing a studio contract is the chance of a lifetime. They will promise you fame, fortune, and all your dreams. What they won't tell you is the price. They won't tell you that you'll give up your childhood, your freedom, and your identity. They won't tell you that you'll spend decades trying to remember who you were before you became who they needed you to be. If I could go back and tell my 11-year-old self one thing, it would be this: you are not a product. You are a person, and no amount of fame is worth forgetting that." The letter was never sent because Elizabeth didn't want to discourage young actors from pursuing their dreams, but she kept it in her private papers, a reminder to herself of what she'd survived. The MGM contract that controlled Elizabeth Taylor's life was 17 years of legal slavery disguised as opportunity. She fought her way to freedom and became one of Hollywood's greatest stars, but freedom came too late to save the girl who'd signed that contract at 11 years old. That girl was gone, manufactured into a product, then transformed into an icon, then finally, painfully, reclaimed as a human being. Elizabeth Taylor spent her whole life trying to find her way back to the person she'd been before. Hollywood told her who she had to be. She never quite made it. None of them did. That was the real cost of the contract. Not what the studio took, but what could never be given back. The question isn't whether Elizabeth Taylor was a great actress or a beautiful woman or a cultural icon. The question is, who was Elizabeth Taylor before MGM decided who she should be? And did that person ever really exist outside of the image they created? We'll never know, because the 11-year-old girl who might have answered that question signed her life away in 1943, and by the time she was free, she couldn't remember who she'd been before they made her into someone else.